Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the 5 greatest Verdi Sopranos. Oh, this was fun. I got to go back and listen to all kinds of fabulous recordings featuring some amazing singing. Some of the names will be familiar, some of them will be less so, but I think that I've come up with a really good list, and I'm very, very interested to see your list as well, as long as it includes sopranos who've done a couple complete recordings of Verdi operas, 2, 3, major roles, that sort of thing. I think we're all going to be in very good shape. I really do. Not just somebody who made a grotty, pre-electrical, acoustic horn screech thing, of whom there are quite a few, and some of them were marvelous singers, don't get me wrong. But I tend to like things that, and prefer judging an artist's absolute greatness by hearing them in full roles, having to do the whole thing in decent sound so we can really tell what was going on. There were some amazing voices, but great Verdi singing actress soprano types. Well, here they are. You ready? First, Martina Arroyo, one of the great unsung vocal geniuses of the second half of the 20th century. Arroyo used to joke that she was that other black soprano, other than Leontyne Price, who we will come to in a moment, because there seemed to be room in the universe for like only one black Verdi soprano. But Arroyo was amazing. She had a voice that was, I think, is beautiful, maybe more purely beautiful than Price's, because it didn't have that funny break between the chest voice and the rest of it. Her registers were rather nicely knit together, and she was a smart singer. Really, and if you watch she has interviews on YouTube, you can see she was just a lovely person, full of quiet humor and confidence in what she could do. She was really tremendous. And she did some fabulous Verdi singing. Her most famous Verdi recordings, probably the Sicilian Vespers on RCA, but she also did Un Ballo in Mascara. She made the recordings with Muti, some fabulous Verdi with Riccardo Muti, and she's just amazing. She wasn't as frequently recorded as she deserved to be, because there was a time, at the time, there were quite a few really good Verdi sopranos out there, but thank God we have what we have. She did the Requiem with Ormandy, she did the Mrs. Solemnis, she was a well-known concert singer. She could do it all, and beautifully. She also made an amazing recording of the Strauss Four Last Songs, which we talked about separately, under Günter Wand, of all people. So Martina Arroyo definitely heads off the list. Next, of course, Renata Tebaldi, another singer who had one of the most purely beautiful voices in the universe. She was always in competition with Maria Callas, who some people would say has to be on the list because Callas did Traviata, but not in good sound. And I don't have Callas on this list. If some of you people are, Callas fanatics, and you're always screaming and shrieking about her, you can stuff her on if you want. She did all kinds of Verdi. She did. But I think all these other singers sang it better, and with just as much insight and intelligence, quite frankly. Anyway, Tebaldi was a phenomenal all-around Verdi singer. I mean, she's famous for Don Carlos, for Aida, for, all the major Verdi roles, except Traviata, of course. Getting a good Verdi soprano doing Traviata who did other things is actually kind of difficult, even though it may be the major Verdi role. But Tebaldi was a stupendous singer, and she was set up to be in competition with Maria Callas during her lifetime, which was unfortunate because they were singers of very different stripe with rather different repertoires. Callas would sing anything, but Tebaldi was a lot smarter in her choice of repertoire to husband her resources, and so she has to be on the list. Next, Zinka Milanov. Absolutely. Milanov's recordings, complete recordings, comprise La Forza del Destino, Il Trovatore, and Aida, with, her basic Met cast. She was a stalwart of the Metropolitan Opera House from like the 1930s, the late 30s, and she gave her last performance, I believe, in 1966. And she was Croatian, and she had attitude. She was a diva, and she also had an absolutely glorious voice. Her reputation was shunted aside a little bit by the advent of Leontyne Price, I think, who kind of eclipsed all comers for a while in the 60s and 70s. But Milanov's recordings have held up very, very, very well. She's a thrill to listen to, and, a little bit old school in the sense that, she was sort of a stand up front and deliver, from the proscenium. But what the hell? I mean, she was a tremendous, tremendous artist. Montserrat Caballé. Now, Caballé not only had an absolutely gorgeous voice, but she had a willingness to do a lot of interesting repertoire. She did do Aida. She did take on some of the fairly standard Verdi roles. She did Trovatore. She did things like that. But, and this is what's really interesting, she did a lot of the early Verdi as part of that, Phillips edition and other things like that. She did things like, I don't know, what was it, Joan of Arc, and Louisa Miller. And these are good operas. They really are. And they needed a singer of her stature, of her caliber, to really bring them to life. And she did that. And so she deserves a tremendous amount of credit, not just for doing the standard Verdi stuff, but for doing some of the less well-known Verdi stuff and for doing it with absolute mastery. It's so important. And I say this over and over again. It's nice to get recordings of unusual repertoire and all that, but it's really even better to get first-class recordings of unusual repertoire by major artists, because that not only sells the product, it introduces people to music they might not otherwise listen to, but it presents these works in the best possible light. And Caballé was extremely reliable for that. In her lifetime, there was sort of a joke that she, canceled as many times as she actually showed up. She had terrible stage fright. I mean, there was a cartoon once in like Opera News, I think, that had this agent sitting there typing out a press release saying, Madame Caballé will be available for only a limited number of cancellations this season. So, she was also somebody who was a little mercurial, but she was a wonderful singer and a lovely person. I met her a couple of times. She always traveled with this entourage, and I felt a little bad for her later in her career because she sang way, way, way past her prime. She sang with her daughter. Her husband was what's his name, Marty, the conductor. But I got a sense that she was kind of being exploited by these people, so that, she was their sole support or whatnot, to make a living. And she did it. She did it with incredible fortitude and loyalty, but she shouldn't have been singing in the last decade or so of her career. Notwithstanding which, she was truly a warm and charming person. And I think that well, she's missed. Let's just put it that way. She was a good soul. Anyway, last, but certainly not least, Leontyne Price. It is impossible to exaggerate the importance of Leontyne Price in the Verdi universe, because when she burst on the scene with Il Trovatore, actually Leonora in Il Trovatore, it was a stunner. And I had the opportunity to see her several times at the Met during her career in the late 60s and early 70s, and when she was going strong, and she was an amazing singer, no question about it. And she captured most of the major Verdi roles for that kind of voice, the Trovatores and the Aidas and that kind of stuff, the Verdi Requiem, and she was a marvel. Nobody disagrees that Price was one of the great Verdi sopranos of all time, and so she concludes my list of 5. I'm very, very interested to see yours, because there are quite a few singers who are not on this list who did some pretty remarkable Verdi. And I think that we can put together a lovely constellation of fantastic, fantastic vocalism. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me. Take care.